So as Adam said, I'm a user researcher at Cardiff University, and as part of my role, I do a lot with web analytics. And I've noticed over the years that as UX people, we tend to, or as people can avoid it because it can be a bit daunting, but overwhelming. You can open up this big black box of stuff and no one quite knows what it is. And I really want to just show you this evening a few things in there that can be useful to us as UX researchers. This is an interesting thing to do with analytics because it wasn't designed for us, it was designed for marketers and their data requirements. So not everything is particularly geared up towards us, but it doesn't mean that we can't use it to find something valuable. I'd also like to say that if you are in UX and you use analytics a lot, none of this will be new to you. If you want to go and do something else with your evening, that's absolutely fine, I won't be offended, but this is more aimed at people that maybe haven't used it once or twice, or want to get into starting using it, or just want to sort of understand a structured way through it rather than just delving in and not really knowing what's going to happen. So with that, I will attempt to share my screen. We'll see how this goes. Okay, share. So you can all see this. Yes, good. Right, and I can still see my notes. That's exciting. That's not worked. Ding. There we go. Right. Hello, it's me again. I've told you this bit largely. I am going to show you some screenshots and bits and pieces from analytics. It does involve some light maths, but not too much for a Wednesday evening, I hope. And if anyone wants to have any questions in the chat, I'll stop at the end of each section to answer brief questions. We'll do longer ones at the end, but if anything needs clarifying, we want to go back over something, then please do pop that in the chat. I'll have a look at the end of each section so we don't end up with lots of tiny queries at the end without context. So please feel free to do that. I also apologise for my head. I've got a funny camera angle. I'm not looking at you. It's just, it's there, and also it's strange, but trying to ignore that. Okay. So before we start, I'd just like to say that you can, if you want, follow along using the Google Analytics test data or sign into your own company account if you have that available to you. I'll quickly go through this. It's not required for the session, but you might want to, in a separate window, play along live if you choose, but you won't lose anything if you don't bother. That's quite okay. But just in case you do, there's a link here. If you go to bit.ly/mytestdata, that will put you onto the analytics demo account page. You then need to scroll down and follow the prompts, sign into Google. You can add this to your Google account, or you can use a company account if you already have access, but please don't worry if you don't want to do this or you can't do this right now. Let me just put it in the chat. Okay, yes, so I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that if you want to, and then I'll carry on with the rest of the talk. While we're doing that, I'll just give you a brief overview of analytics, as you might have seen it or not seen it. Okay. If anyone needs that link again, I'll pop it in the chat now, but otherwise we'll carry on. Hopefully that will work. Cool. Okay, dokie. So a brief introduction to Google Analytics. I'm not going to say Google Analytics for the rest of the evening, probably, because it's quite a mouthful. If I refer to GA or Analytics, that's what I'm referring to. There are other analytics platforms out there. This is the one I'm most familiar with and the one that most of my clients and companies have used. There are things like Kissmetrics and Adobe out there too, which follow similar principles. So you probably can transfer some of this stuff to them if that's what you've come across. So you might have, delving into Google, seen some bits like this. Just ignore them. This sort of chart, it's terrible, it's useless. I don't think it really helps anyone. It's quite clever the way it's put together, but it doesn't give us a lot of useful information. So don't be freaked out by this sort of graph. It's pointless. This is more useful. So almost every page on Google Analytics is a variant of this. It's a chart and a graph. So the graph at the top shows you a change over time, and the chart underneath breaks that down by a specific value. In this case, it's breaking it down by page. So for each page, you can see page views, unique page views, etc., etc. So I'll just quickly walk you through this screen. So as I said, every page on Google Analytics largely looks like this. The downside of that is that you need to be quite clear what page it is you are on. Otherwise, you might find yourself not quite where you think you are, or not getting the information you think you're going to get. But at the top left, you've got your user groups. This is by default set to all users, which is everybody that visits your site. There are ways to segment this down with different user types. We'll come to that shortly. On the top right, you've got the date range. This is super important if you are going to be making any sort of reports or running any experiments or sharing information with clients or internally. Make a note of the date range that's currently set to, because it does reset every day. If you go on a Monday, it will show you from the previous Monday. If you go on a Tuesday, it will move forward by one day. So if you're trying to get comparable analytics together or repeat an experiment you ran the day before, then you will need to change this. And it is always worthwhile jotting down the date range that was set when you first started, just so you can always go back and get exactly the same data rather than a slightly different bit, because you will get confused. The graph I said shows you days, shows you change over time. It's defaulted to by day, but you can also see by week or month to look for broader trends. And the table shows you a breakdown of that information. So most pages are quite like this, effectively. So before I go on to the next section, does anybody need anything repeating about logging on to the test data if anyone's doing that? Just pop me a message in the chat, I'll come and help you, or if not, we will continue. So the useful bits, this is what I would consider a crash course through the bits of Google Analytics that are actually useful to us as UX designers. I say useful because, as I said, some of it is that most of it is designed for marketers, and it's not that we can't use that information, but it might use terminology or focus on things that we're actually not that bothered by straight away. And when I'm talking about this crash course, I'm really referring to the beginning of a UX project where you might have a new problem to solve, or a client's giving you a new brief, and you're going to go in to see what information you can find out about a specific set of web pages or set of users or whatever it is. And so it's not so much for long-term analysis, but that sort of initial stage of a research project when you're trying to get your heads together and see what information is out there. So I'm going to be showing lots of screenshots from Google. I'm going to quickly try and show you a format of how I displayed this on the slides so you can get a feel for what's going on. So the navigation column is always on the left-hand side. We're mostly concerned with the bit titled reports, and we're not concerned with the bit under that called real time, but the four further under that are what we're going to be looking at. I'm going to pop this in this view up there. So if you see in the top right, I will try to, in the top right, show you which area of the site that I'm in, either using this sort of schematic here or just giving you the tree breakdown of where in the menu structure we are. So that will always be there, something in the top right of these slides, trying to help you understand where I am in Google Analytics. If you want to go back and refer to these, I will share afterwards. Then you can just look up there and it should hopefully give you a map to get to the point we're at. So navigating the Google Analytics, as I said, there are four good sections for us. Acquisition, the third one, is less useful, but the other three, audience is good for user demographics, so who users are, where they come from, what devices they're on, and also potentially spying. I will come to that at the end. Behavior, this is good for information architecture and user journeys. It's structured by page, and you can do various clever things to see people's routes through the site and the kind of places they hit and what they do once they're there. And conversions is around sort of user journeys and the e-commerce side of things. So if you've got e-commerce set up on your site and it's in Google, that's good. There may also be things called goals in there, which are effectively non-e-commerce goals in a way. So it's like if you want to see how many people are clicking on a contact form, then that can potentially be set up and in conversion. So it's looking at commercial and non-commercial sort of strategies that you want users to complete on. Yes. So the first thing we're going to look at then is learning about your site users. So you can find this information in audience demographics, and by default it will go to overview. As you can see under there's also age and gender. This tells you as is, not what might be. So looking at this, you might sort of think, is there anything about this you want to change? Do you want to target differently or adjust your content to meet the needs of this audience? Is this the audience you were expecting? You can't get all the answers here, but those are sort of questions you might want to answer looking at this data. Similarly, you can look at device usage. This table can be quite hard to process on its own if you're not used to looking at grids of figures, but on the right-hand side, you'll see I've managed to get a pie chart up. You can do that using some of the controls, change table display. This is quite good for visualizing stuff if you're more a visual person, or equally if you want to cut and paste into a document to show somebody else. There's a very quick way of doing that. So now you can see there's two basic sets of information I found here. There's age and gender. There's also location available there as well. And there's also devices that we've looked at, but they're separate in bits of information. You can combine them to get a more detailed breakdown. So if we go back to this screen, which is the demographic overview, which shows you age on the left and gender on the right, this is just collected, by the way, from what Google knows about its users in many myriad ways. It gathers that data. It's nothing, no user surveys or anything. It's just what it thinks it knows. So it's reasonably accurate, but it's not to the same degree as doing a marketing survey or anything, but it's good enough for our purposes. So what we're going to do now is look at applying a segment. So at the moment, if we just go back to this screen, you'll see it's set to all users, which is saying all site users are affected by this data. However, what you can do is segment this. I'm going to show you a short video, which is probably far too fast for this sort of medium, but what effectively is showing you is how to add a segment. So you can add in a new user group. So what we're going to do here is we're going to unselect all users and select mobile traffic, and then separately we're going to select tablet and desktop traffic. You're going to click apply, wait for that to load, and it will now show you this data side by side, grouped by tablet and desktop traffic and mobile traffic. So what this is showing you is several things. So I'm just going to talk you through the screen. So first of all, it's saying that at the top you can see a segmentation applied. You can see that tablet and desktop traffic is coming from 72% of users in this case, and the mobile traffic is coming from 27% of users. So those numbers roughly add up. Sometimes they come to a bit more than 100% for Google reasons, but they're generally a good indicator of the kind of traffic that's coming to your site. Then you can see each of those broken down by age. So you can see here on the left in the blue chart that the 25 to 34 age group has got a high spike for tablet and desktop traffic and also for mobile. But if you start to look at how the age profiles change as you go up, as you get older, you'll see that mobile use actually increases as people get older, which may be surprising for some people. And again, you may want to ask, okay, why is that? What do we know about our users? Why might that be the case? Should we be making any adjustments to our content or our SEO strategies based on this? It is, however, also worth noting the size of the user group. So we mentioned that 75% is coming in on desktop traffic. So although there is a smaller number of 55 to 64-year-olds using tablet and desktop traffic in the blue chart, and a larger one on the orange chart, in real numbers, it's likely that the blue number is still a higher number of real users than the orange one, because there's more people in that chart altogether. I hope you can follow that maths explanation. What it's sort of saying is that as well as looking at the chart for variances, you also should take into account the number of total users you're talking about, which you can see in the percentages. One of the percentages to watch for is what I've labelled here, size of cohort. This one I think you should largely ignore. It's not useful to us. It's more about Google's sampling, which is that despite being Google and having all of its computers and servers that it has, it doesn't always get data from all of its users because it doesn't want to spend that processing power. So what it's showing you there is roughly how many of your total users it's sampled to get this information. It's generally fine, unless it says like less than 5%, it probably shouldn't matter. But please don't get knickers in a twist about that one, because that one's not so useful to us. This one up on the top, the within segments, that is very useful because it gives you an idea of the ratio of the different segments you've got going. There's lots you can do at a very granular level with segments that I won't go into now. But another good one to try if you're experimenting is those that made a purchase and those that didn't. So you can see, is there any difference in the age, sort of location, device usage of those that made a purchase on your site and those that didn't. And again, you can start to ask yourself why that might be and what strategies you might want to change that. So that's the next one. So again, please pop anything in the chat while I just go on to the next section. If anyone wants me to review any of this, I'll go back shortly if anyone's got any questions about that bit. The next one is we're going to talk about is assessing the current IA. So the current information architecture of your site, the layout of the pages, the menu, etc. So there's a fair amount you can do here. What it won't let you do is build up significant user journeys. It's not as so useful as that to us as UXers, but what it will let you do is look at particular pages, look at the sort of traffic they're getting, and there are some things you can do around landing pages where users arrived, and also the path that they took to get to the page that you're currently on. So you can't get a full journey, but you can get the previous page if, for instance, you're looking to understand how people get to a certain product page or what leads people to a contact page. But this great big long list isn't always that helpful on its own. However, there are some other things. So there's this area called content drill down, which for some sites is extremely useful and for some sites is rubbish. You can take your view on that depending on what you've got, but it will let you look at the folders in what usually turns out to be your site menu. It's based on URL structure most of the time. So as long as your menus roughly follow your URL structure, you're going to be able to drill down into different parts of the site to look at the different areas and again see comparatively which site's getting more traffic, in this case average time on page, whatever data you want to put up in this table. So there's two different icons going on. One is showing you a folder and one is showing you a page. A folder simply means you can click into it and see pages within it. And it means that at this level, the percentages and figures are for all the pages in that folder, whereas a single page is just showing the details for that single page. You can also use this area for more complex queries. If you are familiar with regex or want to mess about with sort of include and exclude rules, then you can do that. This is quite useful, particularly if your site doesn't perform well in content drill down because the menu structure doesn't match the URLs, or you want to just get to a very specific group of pages, and you can use this filter. My favorite one really is begins with, because it just means you can start to put in the URL structure and it will give you a drop down to help you select which ones you want at this point. And means you can subset smaller areas of the site very easily just to have a look around and see what page values are going on there. I will show you, be careful here with percentages. This is one that always trips me up. So there's a lot of percentages going on here, a lot of figures. The one that says total of 55.99% under the big 40,000, that's saying that the page views of this section as a percentage of the overall page views of the site. So this bit of the Google site is getting 56% of total page views. That's fine. However, the percentages next to the page views further down are the percentages of the 40,000 page views that this particular section of the site is getting. So it is quite useful, but you just need to be aware of what it is you're looking at, making sure you don't trip yourself up by adding the wrong numbers together. So just be aware when you experiment with that area. So the next thing you can look at in terms of the IA is landing pages. So this will show you where people are arriving on your site. So again, the menu structure is up on the top right. If you go into the site content and landing pages, it will give you a list, ordered normally by numbers, so the biggest at the top with the landing pages for your site. So you can see in this Google one that the home page is by far the biggest landing page, followed by YouTube, followed by t-shirts, etc., etc. Now it's worth noting just at this point that the Google test data is somewhat limited. It's on the Google corporate store. It doesn't actually have a lot of transactions on it, which we'll discover in a minute. So some of this data isn't that useful for teaching, unfortunately, but hopefully you can have a look on your own sites. But so we'll go back to the landing pages. So as you can see, I've turned on one of the visual graphs here as well, just to get a sense of visually where people are coming in. And it really is the home page. And they're getting some traffic from YouTube, everything else is very, very small. But let's just go through the screen again slowly. So here I've implied a segment. So if you see at the top left, you can see I put on the converted to non-converted segments. So we can see that 14% of people that arrive and end up converting, 85% don't. Not bad really, 15% conversion rate. But when we said before that the homepage and YouTube were the top landing pages, actually, if you look at the converters versus non-converters, you'll see that the homepage has a relatively even amount of converters and non-converters going on. It's still roughly about 60% as it was before. But the YouTube one, it was getting 7.3% of arrivals, but it's only getting 4% of the conversions. So it's not actually performing that well. And this is the sort of data you can start to get from here. If you start putting on segments, particularly converters and non-converters, you get traffic coming in, but is that good traffic? Is it traffic that's going to convert well? And if not, why not? What sort of experiments or other user research might you want to do to discover why that is to improve performance on these pages? People are coming in, great, but they're not doing a good job once they get there. Why is that? That's a classic UX problem that we could go on to solve. Okay, so I'm going to go move on to the next one. So if anyone's got any questions about the previous, please do knock them in the chat, or I will take long questions at the end. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so reviewing core user journeys. So this is more sort of from the e-commerce side of things. Now, not every installation has this enabled, but most should do now. It's up to the administrator of the site's Google account to enable this. So if it's not enabled, it's worth talking to whoever admins your Google account or your client's Google account to get this turned on, because it is useful, especially if you're a commerce site. What this is showing you here is checkout behavior and drop-off rate. So if you look at the table in the middle of the page, it's showing you the number of people that start on the billing and shipping page, the number that proceed to payment, proceed to review, and then the number that drop off at each of these stages. So again, you can start to ask UX questions about why is it so they're succeeding at certain points and dropping off at others. And we know things like people often drop out of the basket because they go to do something else and they leave it hanging for ages. But we also might say, okay, the payment screen's got a really poor conversion rate, and why is that? Is there something wrong with our process here? Could we streamline it? Could we run an A/B test? Those sort of questions. So I just put those labels on so you can see the drop-off rate here is shown at the bottom. And there's a lot of figures on this page. I'm not going to try and go through them all individually, but it is worth just spending a bit of time looking at this sort of stuff, trying to understand what it is you can see. Don't be daunted by it. Everything is explainable, and everything you can Google as well if you need to get some information. And it is good for us as UX designers to get these sort of figures, because it helps put some weight behind some of the suggestions you might be making about expert reviews around checkouts and baskets, which, as we know, can critically change the success or failure of the site. So you could also, again, apply segments to this. So what I've done here is show mobile traffic and tablet traffic against each other. So the one on the left is showing mobile traffic, the one on the right is showing desktop traffic. And you can see that the conversion rate on mobile one is much lower. And again, you can sort of ask yourself, okay, what is wrong with a mobile site? We know that people are less likely to convert on mobile, but not that much less. So what is it that's going on? And again, Google can't give you the answers, but it can start prompt some of the questions you might want to ask and take to your wider team or investigate via other routes. This is also a lesson in why Google is not great with small numbers. So if you look, and this is a shame again because the test data available in the Google store is so low, but it is useful to make this point in that you can see, if you look at the right-hand chart, it goes, the sort of drop-off rate goes from 14 to 1, and that has an arrow coming down with like 900% on it, and no one's quite sure what that means or why. And it's because the way Google's sampling works is that it's just not very good with very small numbers. It's all right for about above 50 of any individual number, but after that, it starts to get a bit confused. So if you are operating on a small site or in very, very small subsets of data, just be careful. These numbers will give you a reasonable idea of roughly how it's behaving, but I think anything less than 50 is going to be inaccurate to a degree where you might want to watch things like percentages and stuff, because they just go a bit crazy. So the next thing we can look at in reviewing core user journeys is goals. Now, goals is effectively a transaction you set up on your site that is usually non-commercial, because for commerce you would use e-commerce stuff. This is something that has to be set up by the administrator of the Google account, but once it's there, it will start to collect data. So things might be like signing up to a newsletter or completing a contact form, which aren't attached to a traditional e-commerce journey, but you still might want to track as your secondary marketing tools to see how they're performing. So you can view your goal completion rates by all goals, or you can look at specific goals in this menu. Now, if you didn't set these up, it's not always clear what they are, because those will have very short, or sometimes a bit oblique names, but that's just where you need to contact the Google administrator for your site, and they'll be able to tell you what it's set up to do. You can't, as a simple read-only user, understand what these goals are. You can't get to a point where it will show you the step-by-step for anything for them, unfortunately. That's only in the admin section. So if you need help understanding these because you didn't set them up, then you'll have to talk to the admin. But again, they will show you where goals are completed. They'll show you how many goals are completed. So again, if you're tracking things like contact form usage or newsletter sign up or anything you want to set up, which is a non-commerce transaction or a goal you'll be able to complete on this site, this will help you understand that. The last thing you can do, if you haven't got e-commerce and you haven't got goals, or in addition to that, is to see where people came to get to a certain page. So this is something called previous page path. This is where you can choose a particular page. Usually you can do a group of pages, but it gets more complicated. So let's say we're going to choose a particular page, and we're going to say, okay, I want to know what page people were on before to get to this page. So it's not a full user journey, but it can tell you where people came from to land on this page. So it's a particular, in this case, they're coming from the home page, they're coming from the store page. Some people arrive straight on this page. It's useful, it gives you a hint of the kind of places people are coming from through the site. And it will also show you, particularly in stress cases, perhaps if you're getting high levels of traffic from one page to the contact form, okay, what is it about this page that's driving people to the contact form? Is the content sufficient? Are they asking for help? What is it that we can do to either carry the success across to other pages or remedy it if it's not seen as a good user journey? Okay, that's the end of that one. Again, just a brief pause if anyone wants to put any questions in, and then we'll move on to spying. I'll have a cup of tea. Okay. So the User Explorer section, also known as spying, this is somewhat ethically dubious depending on your perspective, and again, it has to be turned on by the site admin, but it is there usually. This will show you by some form of like client ID individual user journeys across the site. It's not very useful in terms of big data because you can't sort of, you can't sort of group these together or follow them through any kind of mass way. But if you are trying to sort of understand particular user journeys, or you want to take a sample of these to effectively sort of look at a few user journeys, then you can do that. What they're showing you, if I open it up, is everything they know about an individual user. So when they came to the site, what device they were on, where they came from, how long they looked at a certain page. This stuff is available per user. It's a little bit creepy, but it's there. And what you can do, as I said, is I've used it in a few cases where we haven't been able to do user testing. I've narrowed it down using segments to say 100 users that meet a certain segmentation, and at random chosen 20 of those and reviewed the user journeys just to get a sense of what people are up to. It's not scientifically accurate, but it's as good in some respects as speaking to people or conducting a small survey just to get an overview of the routes people are taking. It requires a bit of effort, a bit of work. You have to piece a lot of stuff together, but it's an option that's available to you if nothing else is. Okay, I've got one question coming up about goals. So Google Analytics allows for up to 20 goals. Do you have any hints on how to fight for these with other departments? An interesting one. I've honestly never seen all 20 goals used. Most of the time I found them underused. What I would say is that goals probably expire over time. So if you know you're trying to sort your contact page out, put a goal up. Let's set it for 6 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, however long you sort of deemed a sort of reasonable life cycle for your website. And then I would fight to take it down, or at least review it and say, okay, do we still need this information? Have we solved that problem? They're not just there to sit there in perpetuity. I think they're a good way of testing sort of something out, seeing if you can sort of set up some change and make a difference. But I wouldn't say that they're very useful over a long, long period of time. And I would just argue for them to be regularly reviewed, because you may have solved that problem or maybe a better problem that needs solving using those 20. But I'm surprised that people are hitting that 20. I'm impressed because, as I say, they're often underused, which is a shame really, because they can provide a lot of useful information. Okie dokie. I hope that answers your question. Please do pop up with anything else you've got going. The last thing I'd like to talk about is running your own research. This is not meant to be a grand thing. The whole aim of this talk is really to give you a few starters for going into Google. But what I have found is that when you do start going into these sessions, you can get very easily distracted. You're not quite sure what you're looking for. It's easy to click around, not quite sure what you're looking at. And that's really, I found, because it's important to approach analytics as any other component of your user research. You need to have a strategy in mind. You need to know what it is you're trying to achieve and roughly how you're going to achieve it. So what I'd like to talk about here is just a few ways you can start to do that so you don't end up just chasing your tail. So do understand your research goals, broad and narrow, and where analytics fits into this. What's the overall aim of the project you're working on? How is analytics going to help you do some research, either in the early stages or later on when you've got some data, when you've made some changes, you want to see that data? What are the specific questions you want to know? Make a list of these. Don't just assume that you can go in and go on a little sort of discovery world. You can do this. I would limit it to an hour, because otherwise you're probably just chasing your tail and wasting your time if you don't really know what it is you're looking for. It's fun to go exploring, but if you're doing this for a project, go in with goals in mind. Otherwise there are so many rabbit holes that you will never come out again. Request access. So you might find that you need to get into have access to the analytics account. You will need a Google email. It doesn't have to be a Gmail one, just one that's set up as a Google account. And the administrator for that Google account will need to let you in. Internally, it's probably just somebody else in your team. For a client, they normally will set you up, and you'll find that, in my experience, they'll let you in only for the duration of your project. So once they finish working with you or finish out the project, they will kick you out again, which is fair enough. Do have a pen, paper, and calculator handy. This is because you're going to want to make some notes, and some calculations you want to do off screen, like adding percentages together. You don't want to lose this work, because especially if you're on a large site, you're trying to get lots of stuff done. Google can sometimes be quite slow to crunch the data. You can sometimes wake up to 10, 30 seconds for a screen to load sometimes. You don't want to have to go back and get another figure from the previous page and you've got to write it down. Also have someone to put your results. So once you've processed, maybe you've done some moderation on some paper first, or you can go straight into Excel or Google Sheets or whatever, then you can start to write stuff down. You can also, on certain screens, export to Sheets or Excel or CSV. So there's a great big data table. You don't have to copy it all down or try and paste it off the screen. You can export as well, and then use that to copy and paste into any further analysis you're doing. Google doesn't allow you to do much in-depth analysis. So if you're trying to put together all kinds of different facts and figures or combine different sources from different screens to get a report together, then you will have to have somewhere else to do your processing and some format for your results. Just screenshotting Google might be okay for a quick presentation, but it won't be enough if you're doing a full research project. Okay, so setting out your results. So have a plan for what you're going to show. Normally, when I do this, I have three things going on. I have data dumps that I've exported from Google. I have an intermediary working sort of sheets or Excel document to mess about and add a few things together and start creating charts. And I have a PowerPoint, or a slides file, which shows my final sort of findings. The middle one, the Excel or the sheets sort of messing about one, I will share with my internal team, but I will not normally share with anybody else because it gets a bit messy. It's just for note taking, keeping things together. But the slides one is generally available to whoever needs to see it. So it's always the truth, but it might have sort of little bits joined together or sort of various things amalgamated from different sources. It's trying to be storytelling rather than the source, but I always do keep my sources in case people ask questions or want to ask a slightly different question that you've got sort of saved back there. Do remember your research goals. Again, just when you're setting out your results, it will help to know what it is you're trying to answer, so you can put these spreadsheets and slides together successfully. Question and date range at the top. I'm going to say date range 3 times. Please remember your date ranges. It will absolutely shoot you in the foot if you do not have your date ranges consistent when you're doing this over a number of days or weeks. It will just get messy. So you need to write down what you looked up and the date range. Make a note of your gathered evidence and then conclusions and further questions. So I will show you an example of that just to pull it all together. So so in this case, I was looking at what are the differences between career traffic and non-career traffic. So this is a website where some of the traffic was coming for end users, people trying to get hold of a service, and some of the traffic was people looking for jobs as part of that service. It's not an uncommon pattern. What we wanted to do was to understand the difference between these two very distinct user groups. Some want to work with the site, others want to be customers of the site. So I managed to break it down by careers and non-careers. I used this, to segment this, I used a query which said, did they go onto the jobs page? So if they didn't go onto the jobs page, I classed them as a non-careers user. If they did go onto the jobs page, I classed them as a career user. It's quite a blunt tool, but good enough for this sort of analysis. From there, you could then segment out the data, so you can see that careers users are generally younger and the service users are slightly older, have a more broad range. This is also what I mean about doing analysis out of Google. You can see things like the gradients that are applied to the percentages to get a visual overview. That's not something that Google did for me, that's something that I did in Sheets to help me better understand the data that I pulled out. Similarly, obviously the chart on the right is created in Sheets rather than in Google. And the good thing about doing it in Sheets and then slides, you can copy all the stuff across and the data will carry through. So if you end up changing the source data, the charts will then update, which is quite helpful for maintaining reports and such, if that's what you want to do. So in terms of setting up my results, here I learned that job hunters are a smaller, younger group, and from the device side of things, they're more likely to be using their phone. And that answers the top research question, which is what are the differences between career traffic and non-career traffic. It's not the only answer, there were other ones as well, but this is the sort of thing that I was coming up with. So this is the basis of a slide I would then put together in my presentation, a bit more better laid out, but I take my data from the sheets and I go, okay, what's the question that I want to answer to present to my client or internal team, and try to answer that in a visual format with a certain amount of text so that people can clearly get a grip on what they're seeing without having to go to too many numbers. The idea being really that you've done the number crunching and you can present a story rather than just some figures. Right, I've got one question here. Do you have any pipeline on how to use tools like how to use tools like Hotjar and Google Analytics? So what I've tended to find is that at the beginning of a project, we will go in and use Google Analytics to do some initial research. And then we will set up event tracking various goals we want throughout the project, and at the same time set up Hotjar. When we come to review the project, it's as simple as, going back to our research questions, what do we actually want to know? We combine those two sources. It's just a case of, when we come to reporting on the project, we'll look in Google for certain aspects, and then we'll also use Hotjar. And I tend to just use Hotjar for the heat mapping and look at those alongside. So when we've got things like maybe page using Google Analytics, I might present that alongside Hotjar heat maps so we can see what it is about the page. And then maybe from along those sorts of sides, we can say, okay, we know from Google that people are going from this page to here. and we can see on Hotjar that this matches the heat mapping, or it doesn't match the heat mapping, so what about is that we might want to investigate. But I don't have any magic way of joining them together. They are two distinct tools that we frequently use in tandem to inform each other. But our pipeline for work is generally just do them at the same sort of time. I hope that's helpful. Yes, okay. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope it's been useful. I really want to stress that Doodle doesn't have to be a big dominating thing. You can get some answers out of it in half a day. No, I would say maximum 2 days, I would say, unless you're doing some really in-depth stuff. Any more than that, you're likely to be just frittering around the edges. What I've tended to quote for clients is 2 days analysis and another day for writing up a report, if that's what they want, depending on where the data or the information is going to go. Please always do start with questions rather than just prattling about, otherwise you will end up chasing your tail and it will be a waste of time. I'm on Twitter if you want to ask me anything there, and thank you. I will take questions over chat or over audio. I'll leave that one to Adam. I've got one here from the chat and then I'll open up to Adam. Okay, find Google Analytics hard work, there are alternative tools, marketing, we have to use Google. So I would say there are alternative tools. You don't have to use Google. I'd say no, there are many, many tools. I would say if that's the one that they're using and they're using it to do things like source tracking and goals and all the rest of the marketing functions in there, then it's probably useful to you to try and work with them. But if you have an alternative tool and it can be used, then there's no harm in using it alongside it, certainly. I've used Adobe, which I did not get on with, and Kissmetrics, which I did quite like, and also things like Hotjar, which obviously is a slightly different approach to things. But I say the more tools, the better if you can get hold of them. But no, Google is not gospel. There are many things it doesn't do very well. And if you've got an alternative, argue for it, certainly. Okay, how are we doing questions, Adam? Do you want to just keep going off the chat, or do you want to ask people? He's got Adam.
It would help if I wasn't muted when I said that. So yeah, there are a few more on the chat, and obviously feel free to do them over audio as well, whatever you like, really. Okay, cool. Right, let's go down here. I've not used Pendo, so I can't comment on that, but maybe somebody else has. So, with the rise of VPNs, could it be redundant? I personally don't see that at the moment enough people are using VPNs to make a big data tool like analytics redundant. I can see how it would cause some issues, but I don't know. I think a lot of people just are a bit oblivious or a bit ambivalent about this sort of stuff. One thing I have noticed, for instance, in the current situation, all of Cardiff University are now working from home, which does affect something for our analytics, which is that we have a filter set up to exclude internal traffic normally, which is people that are in the university are not on our normal analytics platform results, because we don't want internal traffic affecting our end users. Now, everybody is working from home, which means that filter is redundant. So what I think I have had to try and assess is how much traffic, how much it is affecting our results. And I did manage to do a bit of a diff on it and work out that it was not going to affect many sections of the site, and those that did we had to just be cautious about. So maybe you could consider a similar thing with VPNs. I would guess keep an eye on industry standards, how many people actually are using VPNs, and if you can find out if that is significant against your number of users or to your user group. If you're working on a tech site, maybe they do have more VPNs than sort of on a standard sort of university website or any other website. So it's worth considering if it is going to affect your data, but without reading into the future. I don't think in terms of the kind of big data Google processes, we need to worry too much yet. What else have we got? Okay, any other questions? I'm waiting.
Just whilst Demetrius finishes their question, yeah, thank you everyone for coming along tonight. Thank you, Kathryn, so much for the excellent and really comprehensive talk that gave loads of really practical advice on how to do this. That was fantastic. We are still in the process of lining up a speaker for next month, so if you are interested in delivering a talk, it's very, very likely to be another webinar. I don't think we're going to be allowed out again before the next one, which is probably a good thing. So if you'd like to do a talk, whether it's very esoteric or very kind of practical and hands-on like this, then by all means drop me a line and we can sort something out. Over to Kathryn again now for the question.
Yes, okay, so tag manager, yes. I've had limited experience in administering it myself, but yes, it's certainly very useful for us in terms of event tracking, because previously it seemed to be I'm never quite sure how much was just internal inertia and how much was correct, but trying to get stuff tagged up by developers in various companies and agencies that I work for was like wading through treacle. But in Tag Manager, when we could do more things like that up front, again, it was never me administering it, but it was much quicker for me to say, okay, can we get some tags on this so we can follow it? It would happen in 24 hours rather than 24 days or weeks. So certainly, yes, it has speeded things up, and I would encourage people that are struggling to get event tracking or anything, or goals or anything else set up that requires some dev input, to investigate Tag Manager, because I think it has a much better interface and maybe you get stuff done more quickly rather than having to wait for other resource on your team. I hope that helps.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all very much, and thanks again, Kathryn, for the talk. It's still light outside by the looks of it for the time being, so get out and get some fresh air, I guess. But thank you all for coming. See you in about a month. Take care.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathryn.
Thanks, Kat.
Thank you. Bye.